My son has passed away too, so you're gonna head back to your parents, right? We'll take over this house. My dear husband, Tom, passed away unexpectedly. Right after the funeral, as I was drowning in sorrow, Tom's parents, my in-laws, came to visit. Though there weren't many, this house is filled with memories I shared with Tom. Why on earth do I have to leave? Without giving me a moment to dry my eyes, my mother-in-law coldly made the statement. My name is Katie. I work as a secretary at a real estate agency. My encounter with Tom was through the real estate agency where I worked. He was the elder brother of my male coworker, Joe. The two brothers were very close, and since their workplaces were nearby, Tom often dropped by. Since Joe and I worked together in the same position, we became friends. Through him, I was introduced to Tom. Gradually, I started joining the brothers for lunch, and our time together increased. I always thought of Tom as a nice, cheerful guy, but never really saw him as more than a friend. I assumed he felt the same until one day, something happened that changed our relationship. We had made plans to meet at a restaurant Joe had booked, but he had an emergency and couldn't make it. However, we thought it would be a waste to cancel the reservation. So, that was the first time Tom and I were alone together. I later found out that the brothers had planned this, with Joe wanting to set us up. The restaurant had great food, and we got lost in conversation, discussing our backgrounds, values, and more. We quickly became close. The more I got to know Tom, the more I was drawn to his warm smile. From that day, our relationship took a new turn. It didn't take long for us to decide to get married. If it wasn't for Joe's effort, this might not have happened. In that sense, I can't thank him enough. And then, the day came when I met Tom's parents. I was nervous, but they welcomed me warmly. Their thoughtful conversation put me at ease. We're so happy you could come. We've been looking forward to meeting you, Katie. I've prepared lots of dishes hoping today would be special, said my mother-in-law as she looked after me. Tom's parents, like him, were very independent and easy to get along with. I was grateful for the wonderful time I had at my in-laws. Throughout our interactions, they always supported our happiness without pressuring us about marriage or kids. There was talk of living together at Tom's parents' place, but Tom and I had plans to build our dream house. Actually, my grandpa left me a house, I explained. Tom's parents listened intently and nodded. Being the only granddaughter, my grandpa adored me. He had even renovated the house for me before leaving it as an inheritance. He passed away right after settling the inheritance. The property was in a prime location, which had recently been redeveloped, causing property values to soar. But given my experience in real estate, I knew that it might be more beneficial to sell it to fund our dream home project. Although I'm grateful for my grandpa's love, he did tell me that I could either live in or sell the house, so we were considering selling. After getting married, Tom and I moved there. However, it was far from our workplace, and regardless of the great location, it was hard to continue living there. As we proceeded with the selling plans, a significant change came into our lives. Tom, who worked in sales, was transferred. He worked for a major company with branches all over the country. Even though we were newlyweds, they said he was the only suitable candidate, and since it was an official order, he couldn't refuse. I'll definitely be coming home during the holidays. Plus, my parents are coming over to visit. It's okay if you don't want to, but could you perhaps show them around? Your dad and mom are lovely people, so going out with them won't be an issue. But, letting go of our home might take some time. Due to my work, it's decided that Tom would be relocating alone for work. It was all so sudden, but all I could do was suppress my loneliness and worry, waiting for the day we could live together again. True to what Tom had said, during the holidays, especially my mother-in-law would frequently visit. She told me that back in the day when her husband, my father-in-law, used to travel frequently, she had to bear the loneliness multiple times while taking care of young kids. You can create family memories even without kids. Why don't we go out? Maybe shopping will brighten up your mood. Let's go, Katie. Thanks to my mother-in-law, I never felt alone, and in fact, my holidays became busier. But over time, I started to notice some concerns. On my days off from work, my mother-in-law would almost always invite me out. I appreciated it, but by the end of the month, Her invitations became rather forceful, paying no mind to my fatigue or household chores. When I'd say, "I'd like to rest this week," she'd frown as if I'd said something unreasonable. "But isn't it fun to go out together? Or are you saying you don't like hanging out with me?" "No, it's not that. But you've been taking me out every week, don't you need a break too?" She looked sad. No matter how much I tried to clear up the misunderstanding, she wouldn't listen. But as soon as I gave in, she'd flash a bright smile, acting as if she'd forgotten how persistently she'd clung to me. My doubts about her behavior grew over time. The places she dragged me to often involved high expenditures. Constant shopping at brand stores and expensive meals, and she'd set it up so I'd have to cover the bill. She would often leave the store early, and I'd be left with no choice but to pay. She'd neither thank me for the payments nor reimburse me later. Sure, we own our home and my salary is decent, so savings aren't a concern. But Tom and I have always been frugal, so her extravagant behavior felt out of place. Sometimes both in-laws were present, and in those cases, it was even worse. My father-in-law, Joe, would join in, and my financial burden would only increase. I knew I had to address this, but couldn't confide in Tom. He had promised, "I'll definitely be coming home during the holidays," but his new work location was extremely busy, and he couldn't come home often. "I heard from Mom that you guys go out every week. Is everything okay? You don't seem worried." When I video called Tom, I noticed the dark circles under his eyes and his slightly thinner cheeks. The fatigue from work was evident. I felt guilty bringing up the issue with his mother, so I tried to reassure him. "Your mom's been treating me really well. But you need to take care of yourself, okay? I'm fine, so don't worry." I kept reassuring Tom while I continued to bear the cost of outings with the in-laws. However, their behavior escalated, and when I asserted that I couldn't go out one day, they dropped this on me. "Hey, could you perhaps lend me some money?" "Huh? You want me to pay?" "Just a little bit, really. I've already booked a restaurant. I'll just take another friend, so could you cover the cost I don't have on hand?" I didn't want to, but refusing would complicate things. I resignedly opened my wallet. But she never behaved this way in front of Tom. I subtly asked her, "Have you talked to Tom about this?" and was surprised when she responded, "It'd be embarrassing to ask Tom." It seemed she felt it was more appropriate to ask Tom's wife, me, for money. I had long given up on my mother-in-law, and it became a daily occurrence for her to ask for money. At least when I gave her money, which she called an allowance, she would stop forcing me out of the house. I knew the situation had gotten out of hand. But I was exhausted from not being able to communicate with my mother-in-law. Her actions became increasingly bizarre and inexplicable. Without prior notice, she would just show up, and it felt like an invasion of privacy when she would look around the house, inside and out. "Is this something your grandfather left behind? These furnishings. They're fantastic, to have such luxurious items." Some of the furniture were antiques that my grandfather cherished. My mother-in-law seemed to adore them, coming over uninvited and gazing at them dreamily, as if they were her own. "This is mine and Tom's home." I started to consider confronting her about her behavior. Tom might be surprised, but how wonderful it would be if we could figure out how to deal with her together. Her actions were certainly not pleasant. Even if she's family by marriage, it's an invasion of privacy. However, around the same time, Tom's period of work assignment was decided. He'll be back in a short while, and once he's around, my in-laws will probably stop asking for money. A glimmer of hope sprouted in my heart. Tom works hard every day, so I just need to be patient a little longer. I was eagerly awaiting my reunion with him, but then the unexpected happened. "What? Tom collapsed, he's in the hospital?" I felt numb. The call came from one of his co-workers at the assignment, and I rushed to the hospital. Perhaps due to his busy schedule, he suddenly had a heart attack. Tom was taken in an ambulance, but it was too late. My loving husband, who was always the picture of health, passed away suddenly from an unforeseen attack. I had to arrange his funeral in a daze. The overwhelming grief meant I didn't remember much. Joe, my brother-in-law, was there, taking care of most things. "I'm sorry. Even though you've just lost your brother, you're helping out so much." It's my brother's funeral, of course I'd help. More importantly, are you okay with the property? Is the house all set? Towards the end of the funeral, while we were tidying up, I chatted with Joe. I nodded and responded, everything's in order. A few days after Tom's funeral, both of my in-laws visited. However, it was clear they weren't there to console me. It's a pity about our son, but we're here for you, so don't you worry. For some reason, my mother-in-law had a smug grin on her face. To my astonishment, she had arranged for a moving truck, packed full with furniture and items from their home. I was so shocked and confused that I couldn't speak. This certainly looked like a move. Looks like my mother-in-law and her family are trying to move in without discussing it with me. What made them do this? But the answer is obvious. Could it be they're after our property? Even in my confusion, I voiced the concern that had been nagging me. My mother-in-law flashed a cold, smug smile. The property value's gone up quite a bit. I've always had my eyes on this house. Or should I say, the only reason you could marry my son was because of this inheritance? I allowed the marriage because you inherited it. I felt a surge of despair and was at a loss for words. So, you're saying you and your family are gonna live here with me? What? What are you talking about? I asked in confusion, and she raised an eyebrow. Although Tom's death was unexpected, truth be told, my mother-in-law had always planned to get this house. It seems they intend to oust me and take over the property. And they assumed I'd willingly leave the place. Now that my son's gone, you're gonna go back to your parents' home, right? This house will be empty, and that's just sad. So, we're moving in. No need to worry. Her grin distorted wickedly. Overcome with a mix of fear and frustration, I corrected her. The house is already sold though. I tried to suppress a smirk at her misunderstanding, but a hint of amusement showed. In response, my mother-in-law was stunned. Just then, another moving truck, from a different company, pulled up. Excuse me, we're here to move stuff into this house. Perhaps seeing another company's truck made the burly worker approach us for confirmation. The movers my mother-in-law had arranged also stepped out. Realizing that they couldn't start their job with another truck present, they looked perplexed. They sought an explanation from the mother-in-law and father-in-law, but the couple was flustered and clueless. Arguing with everyone wouldn't help. Seeing the chaotic state of my in-laws, I finally regained my composure. I gave clear instructions to move the truck. This house is already sold and the contract is finalized. A new family will be moving in, so we can't have your belongings here, right? As the movers were taken aback, a luxury car arrived. Out came a wealthy-looking couple and their children. Turns out, I no longer owned the property. They were the new owners. My in-laws were utterly baffled, unable to comprehend the situation. Please move the truck quickly. The new occupants can't start their work. Once the in-laws' truck was moved, the movers began their work promptly, bringing in brand new furniture. My mother-in-law, unable to accept the reality, persisted in her demands at the doorstep. The new owner tried to shield his family and approached us, leading to another round of chaos. Who exactly are you? We bought this place. Please have the truck leave. I hadn't expected my in-laws to show up, so I apologized profusely and managed to calm him down. But my mother-in-law wasn't done. Incredibly, she and her husband barged into the house. Naturally, the interior was nothing like they remembered. Not a single piece of furniture that my husband and I had was left. Witnessing this, my mother-in-law was horrified and began to create a scene. What the heck? The house is completely empty. All the antique furniture and lights. They were my favorites. Hey, what's going on here? Katie was outraged, unable to grasp what was happening. When the new occupants threatened, "I'm gonna call the police," her jittery father-in-law quickly fled, pulling his wife along with him. Once they distanced themselves a bit from the scene, the heated mother-in-law cooled down a bit and quieted. For now, I apologized to the new occupants first. Given a warning that there might be more issues in the future, I was allowed to go after noting down the names and addresses of my in-laws. I was drained but still had to explain things to my in-laws. Returning to them, I calmly informed that we had already moved out a few days before Tom's passing. This house was originally planned to be sold with the land, just as initially planned. We had to hold off once due to Tom's work assignment, but the smooth progress had a certain backdrop. The person who supported our decision was Joe. I was perplexed by the change in my in-laws who started asking for money, but I didn't want to worry Tom, so I kept it to myself and had been sulking. Joe, who realized this, came to my rescue. He apparently had a rough relationship with our family-in-law and promised to help whenever I was in trouble. I didn't want to strain my relationship with my husband or my in-laws, so I trusted Joe, who promised to keep it a secret, and decided to consult him about everything. Upon hearing my story, he was furious at his parents. Being Tom's younger brother and also a colleague at my workplace, he understood their scheming very well. And for Joe, his brother Tom was the only family he had. He considered me, Tom's wife, as family as well. Heck, I think our parents either planned to live in that house or cleverly kick the two of us out and claim it for themselves, he said. According to Joe, both of our in-laws have a lavish lifestyle and are pretentious, resorting to any means necessary. Especially the mother-in-law, who acts like a lovely lady on the surface but in reality, only thinks about her own convenience, being quite wicked. The stories Joe, their own son, tells about them are quite shocking. Tom probably never got to see this side of them since he's the eldest and they'd act differently in front of him. Anyway, Joe suggested selling the land as soon as possible to ensure it's not taken away by our in-laws. I agreed with Joe's opinion and decided to proceed with the sale. No matter how precious the property inherited from my grandfather, I didn't want it to become a hindrance to our marriage. Rather, precisely because it's precious, I didn't want any bad blood tied to it. Of course, it wasn't a decision made arbitrarily. Tom and I discussed it and I got his consent. At that time, he got to know about all the actions of his parents. I really didn't want to inform him, but I couldn't handle the sale alone. However, Tom understood my feelings and strongly disapproved of his parents' actions. "I'm sorry I didn't notice earlier. If it's okay with you, let's finalize the sale before my parents make a move. It's a precious house inherited from your grandfather, and I feel guilty." "No, don't worry. If it's gonna cause trouble, I think my grandfather would agree that we should let it go." I decided to sell the land not because of the relationship with my in-laws, but to protect the future with Tom. Regarding the sale, Joe, who is a real estate expert, did his best to find the best buyer. What I needed to do was find a new place to move as soon as possible and act naturally so that the in-laws wouldn't suspect anything. Though the house had been lived in, it was almost brand new, which kept the price reasonable. With that, we quickly found a buyer and everything fell into place. They were the family that had just arrived. Originally, we were supposed to wait for Tom's return in our new house. It's just a shame because Tom was also pleased with the sale. Workers swiftly brought in the furniture. Despite the in-laws being ousted, the moving process steadily moved forward. The in-laws just stood there in shock, but they couldn't stay like that forever. The moving company they had hired approached them, clearly infuriated, demanding an explanation. From the movers' perspective, there was an inexplicable oversight, causing a clash in the moving bookings. "I can't believe this is happening. This is a breach of contract," they confronted the in-laws, but they were at a loss for words and couldn't explain properly. In the end, they had to take back all the household items, and it seemed like they were going to be charged a significant additional fee due to this unforeseen situation. My mother-in-law, perhaps finally grasping the situation, clung to me, trembling. "This is the home of my eldest son's wife, our home too, right? This isn't normal, is it?" She desperately tried to make excuses to persuade me, but I ignored her, took only my belongings, and left. The property now belonged to a new family, it wasn't even mine anymore, so there was nothing for me to respond to. The memorial service for my husband went smoothly. Although I did encounter my in-laws, they seemed like they wanted to say something about the house, but they just whispered amongst themselves and left. I didn't feel any obligation to communicate with them anymore, so we barely spoke. I lived my days in peace. In a new home. In the small house where we were supposed to start anew, I faced the grief of losing my husband, Tom. I had a significant amount of savings from the sale, but with Tom gone, my plans to build our dream home vanished. I returned to work and, immersed in the precious memories with Tom, began to focus on healing and moving forward. On the other hand, it seemed that my in-laws, especially my mother-in-law, had been harboring deep resentment. I didn't want to deal with them anymore, so I didn't inform them of my new address. Being unable to interact with me further intensified the dissatisfaction inside my mother-in-law. She was too proud to go to my brother-in-law, Joe, with whom relations had soured, and she didn't know where I lived either. The stress piled on, and eventually, she lost her balance. One fateful night, she attempted a heinous act by spreading gasoline around the sold house. Fortunately, a nearby resident found her suspicious and detained her. The police were alerted, and it was found she had also prepared paper and a lighter. She was arrested on suspicion of attempted arson. The man who almost had his house set on fire was extremely furious when he recognized her as the woman who had stormed in on the moving day. He was adamant about pressing charges, and I was informed. I apologized, but that was for the horrifying experience of almost being a victim of arson. There was nothing I could do about my mother-in-law's actions. In the end, she couldn't avoid being charged. And due to my repeated apologies, I managed to get forgiveness on the condition that such an incident would never happen again. Having grown up spoiled and never experiencing hardship, my mother-in-law had always gotten what she wanted. That's probably why, when she couldn't have that house, her frustration led to a twisted envy. She began to resent both the house and the land, which drove her to crime and eventually landed her in prison. Her husband, who should have been her pillar of support, fought constantly after her arrest and ultimately decided to divorce her. Thus, when she was released from prison, she had no home to return to. But, one could say it was the result of her choices. Joe, having lost his brother, felt lonely but always said, "Having you as my sister-in-law makes it bearable," comforting me. Even though I had cut ties with my in-laws, I hadn't lost all my family. For Tom, who I believe is watching over me from heaven, I decided to live each day peacefully.